It started, as most of these neighborhood dramas do, with a letter. Not a kind letter, not a polite reminder, but one of those bold, official notices, dripping with arrogance. The HOA had decided that my 6-foot wooden fence, the one I had paid for, the one I maintained, the one that gave my family a little privacy from the constant parade of clipboard patrols, was suddenly in violation. They claimed it disrupted the neighborhood's open aesthetic. That's fancy HOA talk for, we don't like it, so take it down. I remember standing there on my porch, letter in hand, staring at that paper like it was some kind of personal attack. And honestly it was. Because it wasn't just about wood and nails, it was about control. They didn't want me to have boundaries. They didn't want me to have peace. They wanted obedience. I tried reasoning at first. I wrote back, politely, pointing out that my fence wasn't hurting anyone. In fact, most of my neighbors loved it. Kids played along it. People leaned against it while chatting, and it even kept stray dogs out of my yard. But of course, logic doesn't work on an HOA board drunk on its own authority. Their response? A fine. Daily penalties until I complied. Every sunrise, the numbers stacked higher, like a punishment for daring to say no. And with each notice slipped under my door, I felt my blood boil hotter. I knew then this wasn't just about a fence. This was about showing them that they couldn't bully me into submission. So I made a decision. If they didn't like my fence, I'd give them something they'd never forget. One night, under the hum of my back porch light, I sketched it out. Not just a fence replacement. A fortress. Towering walls, reinforced gates, stonework that looked like it belonged in some medieval stronghold. If they wanted me to tear something down, I was going to build something so big, so bold, so unmissable, that it would make their precious, open aesthetic look like a joke. I wasn't thinking small. I called in contractors, masons, even a buddy of mine who used to design theme parks. We sourced stone, steel, and heavy timbers. Every delivery truck that rolled into the neighborhood made the HOA twitch. They sent me emails. They sent me threats. They even tried to show up and stop the work. But every time they came, I had permits. Perfectly legal. Ironclad paperwork. The look on their faces when they realized they couldn't legally stop me? Priceless. For weeks, the sound of hammers, drills, and saws echoed through the block. Kids would gather on the sidewalks to watch, their eyes wide, whispering to each other about the castle rising up in the middle of suburbia. Neighbors stopped by with lawn chairs just to witness the rebellion in action. Some brought snacks. It became the neighborhood's main event. The HOA, meanwhile, lost their collective minds. They showed up at City Hall, trying to block my permits. They argued in their meetings that I was disturbing the harmony of the neighborhood. They even claimed I was lowering property values. But here's the funny thing. The realtors disagreed. Some of them actually said my fortress was raising values, making the neighborhood unique, interesting, even desirable. Every brick I laid, every beam I set, wasn't just construction. It was a declaration. You don't own me. You don't control me. And you can't stop me. After months of sweat, late nights, and more concrete than I thought possible, it was done. The fortress stood in full glory. 12-foot stone walls, an arched wooden gate reinforced with steel, ivy climbing the sides, even a small watchtower that overlooked the street. At night, spotlights lit it up like something out of a storybook. The HOA board gathered across the street the day it was finished, their faces pale with fury. They whispered, pointed, scribbled notes, but there was nothing they could do. I had followed every law, filed every permit, dotted every I, and crossed every T. My neighbors? They threw me a party. We grilled burgers inside the fortress courtyard, music blasting, kids playing tag through the stone archways. People took selfies at the gate, proudly declaring they lived in the castle neighborhood. What had started as a fight became a community celebration. The HOA tried one last desperate move. They sent me another letter, demanding modifications. They claimed the fortress was a safety hazard, a distraction to drivers, even an eyesore. But this time, I didn't just ignore them. I fought back. I hired a lawyer, slapped their letter on his desk, and watched as he laughed. The HOA was powerless. They had overstepped, and the law wasn't on their side. Within weeks, their threats disappeared, their fines evaporated, and their voices went quiet. And here's the best part. Slowly, other neighbors started upgrading their homes too. Not with fortresses, but with bold gardens, fountains, colorful paint jobs. Things that made them happy, not just things that fit some bland rulebook. My rebellion had sparked something bigger. Now, when I stand at the top of my little watchtower and look down at the street, I don't just see walls. I see freedom. I see proof that when you stand up to control, you can change more than your own life. You can inspire everyone around you. The HOA wanted me to tear down a fence. Instead, I built a fortress. And that fortress became more than stone and steel. It became a symbol, a reminder that sometimes the only way to deal with unreasonable power is to show them just how unreasonable you can be right back. So now, when people drive past my house, they don't see a violation. They see victory. They see rebellion. They see a castle that will stand long after the HOA's paper threats have crumbled into dust. Because in the end, this was never about fences. It was about freedom. And freedom, once built strong enough, becomes unshakable. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable began to happen. My fortress wasn't just mine anymore. It became a landmark. People used it as a meeting spot. Kids gave each other directions like, "Turn left at the castle." Joggers paused to take photos at sunrise when the first light spilled across the stone. It was surreal, watching my act of defiance turn into something the entire community embraced. And with that shift came courage. Neighbors who had been too afraid to challenge the HOA suddenly found their voices. Mrs. Parker, who had always wanted a bright red front door but was told it had to be beige, painted it crimson and dared them to complain. The Johnsons, tired of being fined for their wildflowers, ripped out their approved grass lawn and replaced it with a pollinator garden that bloomed in every color imaginable. Even the quiet couple down the street built a whimsical treehouse for their grandkids, complete with rope ladder and pirate flag. The HOA, once feared and obeyed, now looked weak, like paper tigers roaring from their folding chairs. And the more we pushed back, the more irrelevant they became. Of course, they didn't go quietly. The board held emergency meetings, their voices shrill with panic, trying desperately to reclaim authority. They mailed out new policies, thick packets stuffed with legal-sounding jargon that nobody read. They called in inspectors, hoping to intimidate us. But every time they tried, we pushed back harder. I'll never forget the day they brought in a lawyer to stand on my street and lecture about zoning harmony. Half the neighborhood gathered around, arms crossed, listening silently. When he finished his speech, one of the kids shouted from my watchtower, "Long live the fortress!" The crowd erupted in cheers, laughter echoing off the stone walls. The lawyer packed up his papers and left without another word. The HOA's power crumbled not with a bang, but with ridicule. And once people start laughing at authority, that authority is finished. Months passed, and my fortress became more than a neighborhood rebellion. It became a story people shared far beyond our little streets. Local news crews came out with cameras, eager to film the suburban castle. Articles popped up online with headlines like "Homeowner turns HOA fight into fortress victory" and "Castle versus Clipboard. Guess who won?" Strangers drove from nearby towns just to see it. Some would stop me in the grocery store and say, "You're the fortress guy, right?" I'd laugh, but deep down, I knew it wasn't about me. It was about the idea that no matter how small the fight, no matter how stacked the odds, you could stand your ground and win. My house wasn't just a home anymore. It was a rallying cry. But here's the part nobody really talks about. Victory changes you. For months, I had been consumed with anger, paperwork, construction, and strategy. Every day was a battle, every night a calculation. When it was finally over, when the fortress stood tall and the HOA was silenced, I had to ask myself, now what? I remember climbing the watchtower one quiet evening. The sun was setting, painting the horizon gold and crimson. For the first time in months, there was no hammering, no shouting, no letters taped to my door, just silence. And in that silence, I realized something. The fight hadn't just been about proving them wrong. It had been about proving something to myself. That I could stand tall. That I didn't have to fold under pressure. That freedom, once claimed, feels better than any fence, any gate, any wall. And that realization, that deep, soul-anchoring truth, was worth more than the fortress itself. Now, years later, the fortress still stands. Ivy has crept further up the stone, softening its edges. Kids who once played hide-and-seek in its shadow have grown taller, but they still stop by to tell me stories of their adventures. The watchtower is no longer just my lookout. Sometimes neighbors climb it too, to watch fireworks on the 4th of July, or to see the town lights glitter in the distance. The HOA, they're little more than a memory. The board dissolved after most of its members resigned, humiliated and exhausted. In their place, the community formed a new association, one built on fairness, cooperation, and respect. We learned that rules should protect people, not control them. That homes should be places of joy, not cages of compliance. And every time I walk through that arched gate, I'm reminded, the fortress isn't just walls. It's a legacy. It's proof that when people stand up, even against the pettiest of tyrannies, they can reshape the world around them. So here's the truth I carry with me. They demanded I tear down my fence, but instead, I built something no one could tear down. Not because of the stone, or the steel, or the sheer size of it, but because of what it represents. When people drive past my house now, they don't just see a fortress. They see a reminder that power is fragile when it's built on fear. A reminder that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when pushed too far. A reminder that sometimes the boldest rebellion is simply refusing to bow. And that's the legacy I leave behind. Not the battles, not the paperwork, not even the watchtower itself, but the idea, the unshakable truth that freedom, once defended, becomes eternal. So the next time someone tells you to take down your fence, remember this. You don't always have to play small. Sometimes the answer is to build a fortress. And when you do, the world will never look at you the same way again. What I didn't expect was how far the story would travel. At first, it was just local gossip, neighbors whispering about the man who defied the HOA. Then it reached the local newspaper, a small article buried between headlines about weather reports and city council meetings. But that was enough. One photo of my fortress, standing defiantly among cookie-cutter suburban houses, struck a nerve. Suddenly, people from nearby towns started visiting. Families took detours just to drive past and see the castle house. Strangers knocked on my gate asking questions, laughing, sharing their own battles with HOA boards, zoning commissions, or landlords. Some of them looked at my fortress like it wasn't just stone, but hope that they too could push back. What had begun as my personal rebellion had become something bigger, a symbol people claimed for themselves. Years went by, and seasons cycled over the fortress walls. The ivy thickened, curling over the stone like nature's crown. Children who once played knights and dragons in the shadow of the gate grew up, went off to college, then came back with their own kids to tell them the story. That's the fortress, they'd say. It was built because someone refused to be told no. And each retelling added weight, turning my act of defiance into folklore. What was once paperwork, sweat, and long nights with concrete mixers had become legend. Parents whispered it as a lesson. Don't let anyone push you down. Stand your ground. Kids carried it as a dare. Don't be afraid to dream big, even if the world says no. The fortress wasn't just walls anymore. It was a teacher, a storyteller, a reminder carried across generations. One day, a family from 3 towns overstopped me outside the gate. They weren't neighbors, they weren't tourists. They were people caught in their own HOA nightmare. They stood there, exhausted and angry, with fines stacked against them and board members breathing down their necks. "Is it true?" they asked me. "Did you really win?" I smiled, gestured toward the towering stone, and said, "Does this look like losing?" We sat on the fortress steps that evening, sharing stories. I told them how I had felt the same way once, cornered, powerless, overwhelmed. I told them the secret wasn't just paperwork or permits, but persistence. You don't win by folding. You win by refusing to fold, by being louder, stronger, and more stubborn than the people trying to break you. They left that night with fire in their eyes. And as they drove away, I realized something. The fortress wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who needed proof that rebellion could work. Sometimes, late at night, I'd walk the perimeter alone. The moonlight would cast long shadows across the stone, and the air would hum with silence. From the outside, it looked imposing, a wall built to keep the world away. But from the inside, I knew the truth. It wasn't about shutting people out. It was about keeping dignity in. Standing there, hand brushing against the cool stone, I felt something deeper. The fortress wasn't just about defiance anymore. It had become a sanctuary, a place where neighbors laughed without fear of fines, a place where children played without clipboards lurking nearby, a place where freedom lived, tangible and undeniable. And in that quiet, I understood. This fortress wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of everyone else's. I know someday I won't be here to guard these walls. Time has its way of moving us all forward. But when that day comes, I'm not worried, because the fortress doesn't need me anymore. It has its own life now, its own heartbeat. Neighbors will keep telling the story. Children will keep climbing the watchtower. Families will keep pointing to the gate and saying, "That's where it all changed." And maybe, just maybe, someone in another town will hear the legend and build their own fortress, not of stone, but of courage, of defiance, of freedom. Because legacies aren't just what we leave behind. They're what we set in motion. And this fortress set in motion something I never expected. A chain reaction of people choosing to live free. So here's the truth, the final truth. The HOA thought they were asking me to take down a fence. What they really did was build a monument to freedom with their own arrogance. Their demands became my rebellion, and my rebellion became a fortress that will outlast every one of their signatures, fines, and threats. When the paper has crumbled, when the bylaws are forgotten, when even the names of those board members have turned to dust, this fortress will still stand. Stone against sky, gate against time. A reminder, eternal and unshakable. Because rebellion doesn't fade when it's carved in stone. It echoes. It multiplies. It lives forever. And long after I'm gone, when strangers drive down this street and see the fortress rising above the trees, they won't think of fines or fences or HOA meetings. They'll think of freedom. And that, more than anything, is immortality. And so, the story closes not with a battle, not with another letter slipped under my door, not with anger or bitterness, but with something far greater: silence, peace, and permanence. The fortress stands as more than stone, more than rebellion, more than a monument to defiance. It stands as proof that no matter how small the spark, no matter how trivial the demand, Resistance can grow into something eternal when it is fueled by courage. Long after the HOA's paperwork has turned brittle and yellow, long after their voices have been forgotten, long after my own footsteps no longer echo across the courtyard, the fortress will remain, carved into the memory of everyone who passes by. They won't see walls or gates. They'll see strength, resilience, and the fire of one person who refused to bow. They'll tell the story not because of fines or fences, but because of freedom. And in that way, this rebellion never truly ends. It lives on, carried in whispers, carried in stories, carried in the unshakable stone that will watch over this street long after time has erased everything else.